The gods would held the winter like a secret. Frost had furred the black bark of the oaks and crept into the red-veined leaves of the weirwood, so that each breath the heart tree gave seemed to make the whole grove whisper. John stood beneath the pale, carved face and watched steam coil from his mouth. The pools were skinned with ice, thin as a window pane and spidered where fallen leaves had disturbed the surface. Ghost moved like a pale shade between the trunks, so silent that only the sudden glimmer of his eyes betrayed him. He heard his father before he saw him. Eddard Stark's boots scarcely sounded on the hoarfrost, yet John felt him as one feels the weight of a gaze. Lord Stark stopped at the base of the weirwood, where the roots rose like old bones. His black cloak made a dark river over the snow. "You asked to speak with me," Ned said, as if his voice belonged to the place. John had rehearsed the words so many times they ought to have come easily, but his tongue now felt as stiff as his fingers. "I wanted to say my farewells, Father, to the gods and to you." He drew himself up. "Lord Stark." A corner of Ned's mouth moved. "You need not call me Lord, not here." His eyes lifted to the carved face. Red sap wept from the weirwood's eyes like tears. "You would say farewells. You mean to the wall." John nodded. The word had been the shape of his future ever since Benjen Stark's quiet stories had filled the long evenings. The wind that cut like a blade, the ice that groaned like old timber, the men in black who stood their watch while kingdoms rose and fell beyond the snow. Night's watch had sounded like penance and honor all at once. Benjen said, "He said I could make a life there." "You could." Ned's breath smoked. "There is honor there yet, but penance, and the wall is far more than a word spoken over a fire." John held his father's gaze. "I am ready for cold," he swallowed. "Ready to take the black." Ned was silent a time. Snow sifted from the lowest boughs as a crow shook itself awake and flew. Ghost laid his head on John's thigh, a living weight, warm through the wool. "You are ready for much," Ned said at last, "which is why you will not ride with my brother. I would ask another thing of you." John could not help it. The word struck him from the side like a thrown stone. "Another thing?" "The veil," Ned said. "Runestone, if Bronze-Yon will have you. I will write to him and to Nestor at the gates of the moon. The high road is cruel, but there are safer ways by sea. From White Harbor to Gulltown, with proper company." The veil. The word was a mountain rising where John had expected a wall. "But why?" Ned's breath fogged and ran away in tatters. "Because I was a boy there once. Because the veil makes men of iron and keeps them from rust. And because I will not have your first oath be one you took to hide yourself from your own life." He turned then, eyes on John's face as if weighing it against a measure none could see. "I have wronged you by keeping you here under looks that were not of your making. If you are to be a man, you should be seen for yourself. Bronze-Yon honors the old blood and the old gods. You will ride, you will train, and you will be measured by your sword hand and your truth." John's heartbeat had become the only sound in the grove. "And my mother," he said before he could stop. "Do you send me away because—" Ned's jaw tightened. "I send you because the realm turns beneath us." He said it softly, as if speaking to the tree itself. "Because I have been called south to serve a friend who sits a throne that eats friends. Because I will not have your life decided by the quarrels of men who do not know you. You will go east, not north." John's throat hurt. "When?" "Soon." Ned drew a letter from his cloak, the seal unbroken, the wax as blue as a winter sky. "I have written to Lord Royce, and to Nestor who holds the gates. Another letter I will send by a rider to Gulltown to Lord Grafton, to grant you passage and safety. You will not go alone." He lowered his voice. "Peter Baelish offers to see you safe to the Bloody Gate." Littlefinger. The name tasted strange. John had heard it often enough from the Tully servants in Winterfell's kitchens when they thought no Stark listened. Half laughter and half scorn. Ned's mouth did not smile. "He is master of coin and knows the ports and the men who keep them. He was a ward of Hoster Tully once. He claims the Vale as a second home. It suits him to be helpful. Let it suit us to accept." John remembered a slender boy in one of old tales. wounding love and being wounded in turn. "Does it suit you?" he asked softly. "It suits what must be done." Ned's eyes had the color of winter rivers. "I would go myself if a king were not drawing me southward by my name. I will send you with Ghost and men I trust to the crossroads inn. From their Baelish's train will take the eastward road. You will have letters for the Royce. If the roads are fouled, you will sail." John listened to the words as if they were being spoken underwater. The Godswood was suddenly too small, the world beyond its bows too wide. "Rob," he said, hating the way the name caught. "Arya, Bran. You will write, and you will return in time a man grown. That is a thing Winterfell needs." Ned's hand rested on his shoulder. It was a father's weight, not a lord's. "I will ask one more boon of you. Do not go to your lady mother to take farewell. It is not kindness to either of you." John had not intended to. The ache behind his breastbone he knew well. He had learned to live around it, and it had made him in some places harder than he wished to be. He nodded. "I'll tell Rob." Ned let his hand drop to brush the direwolf's head. Ghost's ears twitched, his eyes half closed. "You asked me once if a man could be both wolf and something else. Be both, John. Learn from the mountain, but do not let it turn you to stone." "I will try," John said. "Do more than try," Ned answered. He tipped his head to the weirwood, the carved face whose tears had frozen to red beads. The old gods see the thing done. It was done. They rode 2 days later under a sky hard as iron. Rob came as far as the first mile of the King's Road and rode back with his jaw set tight, saying nothing for fear he would say too much. Arya's hug was all elbows and fierceness, and she stepped back to punch his arm, which somehow made her eyes less bright. Bran slept. From the window of the broken tower, he did not watch them go. John told himself that this was mercy and did not much believe it. The men Lord Stark sent were quiet Northmen with marten fur hoods and faces that had forgotten how to laugh. Ghost ran ahead or beside with a tireless, floating gait that made the horse beneath John feel clumsy and loud. For 3 days they threaded frost-old woods and frozen meadows. The King's Road went on straight as a vow, and the land slipped past. Barren orchards, smoke from distant holdfasts, frozen ponds where boys cracked ice with poles and shouted to hear their voices carry. By the time the inn rose from the winter fields, whitewashed walls dulled by weather, the men were crusted with road and the horses blowing steam. The sign that swung above the door showed a cleft log and a foaming tankard painted on weathered wood. John's men took the measure of the yard without seeming to. Ghost vanished into shadow like breath into cold air. Inside, the common room smelled of yeast and onion and wet wool. A fire burned. An old dog with one eye lifted his head. Men with southern accents bent over their stew, and a fluting voice told a tale that might once have been bawdy before winter cut its legs off. John found a corner where he could watch both door and hearth, as Ben-Jen had taught him, and waited. He knew Peter Baelish as soon as he came in, though he had never seen him before. Not for the mockingbird pin, though that caught firelight and flirted with it, but for the way the room turned its head. Not all at once, not like a lord's entrance, like a scent finding a breeze. Men shifted. A woman laughed a fraction too soon. The innkeep's hands found a clean cloth. Baelish's eyes found John as if he had always known where to look. They measured him, the way a tailor's quick hands might measure a man without asking to stretch his arms. He came without haste, cloak prinked of fox and dark beaver, and smiled with his mouth more than his eyes. "Stark," he said, "or a snow flurry of one at least." "John," John said. He stood. Ghost stepped from under the bench like a spring uncoiling and put himself between them. The room went a little quieter. "What a pretty beast," Baelish said, not moving his feet back a fraction. "Do you call him gentleness?" "Ghost." John rested a hand on the direwolf's neck, feeling living warmth and the thrum of breath. "Lord Baelish." The Lord waved a hand. "Peter. Everyone says Peter, even those who mean to bite me." He gave the men behind John a glance that took their measure as quickly as he had taken John's. "Lord Stark chooses good shadows. Shall we sit Before the stew is all onion and nothing meat." They sat. Peter ate a little, as if he were making a point to the stew, and talked much, as if words were a meal. He told John he had been born on the smallest of the fingers, where wind blew his father's narrow towers nearly sideways some winters, and that the Vale had taught him a love of cliffs and patience. He spoke of Gulltown's keys and tariffs as if they were a child's toy he had taken apart and put back together to see how it ticked. He spoke of John Arryn like a high shelf one could dust and bow to at once. His eyes missed nothing. "And you?" he said at last, when the stew bowls were empty and Ghost's head lay flat on his paws. "Do you long for the wall as a boy longs for a sword too big for him to lift?" John chose his words. "I long to prove myself," he said. "It seemed a sure way. And the Vale seems unsure, I suppose." Peter's fingers toyed with the edge of his cloak. "The Eyrie, like a woman's favor, can be withdrawn in an instant if the weather turns. Runestone is steadier. Bronze Yone is a block of the first men that has forgotten the chisel. You will learn honor there, and how much it weighs." He tilted his head. "Do you also wish to learn how men carry what is heavy with ease while other men strain at what is light? Is that done with coin?" John asked, not mocking. He had never understood the way gold could move men as surely as arms. With coin, with names, with promises you can keep and others you only mean while the wine is sweet. Peter smiled thinly. "With the right word in the right ear in the right room. The world is more rooms than roads, Jon Snow." "I know roads," John said. "I'll learn rooms." "Good," Peter said gently. "They need not be enemy camps." He leaned back. "We go east with dawn. There is word that the high road is not kind to fat purses. I find men are less inclined to cut a blade at my belly if there is a bard singing of my belly at the same time. We will travel with color and noise. Let every robber know that if he robs us, the tale of his grandfather's goat will be sung so poorly in the mountain villages that he will never know peace again." John found himself half smiling in spite of himself. "You are not a knight." "No," Peter agreed, "but I have lived because knights were busy elsewhere." They went east on a day that broke with a pale seam of light over flat, iron fields. Peter's train was a small caravan of silk and coin and vowels. Men who said their R's like knives, men who rolled them like waves. There were 2 wagons of bolts of cloth, each wheel banded with iron so thick it made the road complain, and a pair of perfumer's chests that smelled like the gardens of a warm country John had only ever heard of in old Nan's stories. There were men-at-arms in leather and mail, the scales darkened so they did not flash. A boy with a harp. A narrow man with a broad nose who could throw knives and make them seem jokes until they stuck 3 fingers deep in a door. Ghost did not care for the perfumers and kept to the wagon's shadows, where he could smell wood and ox sweat and the good iron tang of wheel nails. Peter watched the dire wolf with the same mild attention he gave to a full purse, interested as one is in the shape of profit. They crossed the Trident where it split to make islands long as a fingernail from the air, but from the road each was a world of mud and reed. The river ran black under the old bridge. Peter paused in the middle to flick a copper into the water. "For the trout," he said, and when John looked at him, he added, "Not all tolls are paid to men." It was on the high road that the winter bared its teeth. The mountains went up like gods that had been surprised and turned to stone with their mouths open. The path became not a path but a thought the rocks might have had once. Snow slew in places where the sun had no courage to go. They passed a way-castle, stone, a squat shadow clinging to the mountainside, and a woman with wrists like rope let them through a gate with a nod as sparse as her hair. "Road's bad," she said. "Clans are hungry. We have bards," Peter said, as if this were a kind of roast. She gave him a look like a hammer, then kissed the haft of her spear and spat for luck. "Then you have meat," she said. Peter's men were wary then, and so was John. Ghost went ahead in his soundless way and came back twice with his hackles clocked forward, a low sound in his throat like a saw waking. They came at a bend where the road nodded around a shoulder of rock. Men with crow feathers braided into their hair and iron nails in their ears bloomed from the boulders like thistles' suddenly grown arms. They wore hides and bits of stolen mail. One had a helm shaped like a boar's face, broken tusk and all. They did not shout. They dropped. The first man hit the perfumer's chest with a force that made the wood sing. The narrow-nosed man with the knives threw one before he breathed. It took the raider in the meat of the thigh, and he fell with a sound like a strangled bird. John was already moving, Ghost ahead of him white and silent as snow falling. A raider swung a cleaver at the dire wolf. Ghost seemed to change direction in the air and tore the man's arm at the elbow, so that the cleaver turned over and went into the raider's own shin. John's sword came free with a sound that felt like truth. He met a man with a stone-headed mace and caught the first swing on his blade. The shock ran up his arm, a cold that came from metal, not wind. He slid, stepped, thrust. The man howled, his blood as bright as berries pressed in winter. Something struck John's shoulder with the flat of a blade and made his teeth ring. Another man stepping out of the rock itself. John went down to a knee, rolled, let the stone take the weight the man had meant for him. He came up inside the man's reach and shoved his sword up under the ribs, and felt the catch thrum as it touched a heart. When it was done, there were 5 bodies on the road and 3 more leaving red on the snow as they crawled into the rocks. Peter had not drawn a blade. He stood with one hand on the perfumer's chest and the other palm up, as if offering heaven the better argument. He was breathing a little faster than was polite. John wiped his sword on the hide of the boar-helmed man and found his breath again. The men-at-arms were looking at him with a way of looking he had not often had in Winterfell. Ghost licked blood from between his toes and shook himself. "Northmen," Peter said softly. "I shall remember to travel with them more often." "Are you hurt?" "Shoulder," John said, rolling it. "It will stiffen." "We must keep ahead of stiffenings," Peter murmured, already calculating how far to the next Waycastle, whether the road would have its knees pulled out from under it by night. His gaze trailed the blood, thoughtful and remote. "There is a singer's bit in this somewhere," he mused. "A wolf on a white road. A boy who moves as if he remembers steps someone has only ever told him. Remind me, boy. When you are a man, I will find a lad to sing you better than the world deserves." They reached snow with numb hands and faces. The second Waycastle rewarded them with hot spiced beer that tasted of clove and survival. John warmed his palms around a stone cup and watched the steam escape like soul. The captain there had a Vale accent that made the words bare as bones. "Bronze Yon sent word," she said when Peter showed her Ned Stark's letter. "Take the lower path after Skye. Clans have been nose up along the ridge. Gates of the Moon is open to you." "Then we will not go to the Eyrie?" Peter asked. "Lady Arryn has no patience for strangers that don't climb," the woman said coolly. "And the wind's taken the mule path anyway. The snow broke the southern ladder 3 nights ago. You can lift a man to heaven with prayer, but you can't lift a mule." Her eyes flicked to John. "You'll go to the gates, boy. There's Royce blood enough there to make you feel watched. Then down to Runestone." "If it pleases Bronze Yon," John said, echoing the form he had heard his father use in this other place of his childhood. The words fit his mouth like a new bit in a horse's teeth. Pleased Bronze Yon. The gates of the moon rose out of mountain shadow like a memory of summer. A great, 4-towered castle sitting where the road at last drew breath. Snow lay along its curtain walls like the white trim of a lord's cloak, but the gates themselves stood wide, banners hanging stiff, a falcon in flight on blue. Inside, heat made the snow slump from stone like tired men. Nestor Royce, High Steward of the Vale, took John's measure with the blunt courtesy of a man who counts ledgers with his thumb. He wore bronze scales worked with runes that glimmered when a torch moved. "You've Yon's jaw," Nestor said, and then, as if aware of the rudeness of that, added, "I suppose you've your father's as well. I knew Lord Eddard when both of us had more hair than wisdom. You're to Runestone. It holds the earth better than some of our high toys." "I am grateful for any stone that holds," John said. He found himself glancing up to where the Eyrie hung above them like something a child might dream. He thought of the wind there and the moon door that men talked of as the mouth of heaven itself, though he had always thought heaven should look kinder. "You'll have a mule to take you part of the way, and a girl to lead it," Nestor said. "She's half mountain and half sense. She'll think your wolf is a poem." He was right. The girl appeared with a bridle in one hand and a grin that showed a chipped tooth. Her hair was chopped blunt and tied with a strip of old blue silk. "I'm Maya," she said, as if that were reason enough for any road to unfold for her. "That beast yours?" "Ghost," John said. Maya knelt and offered her knuckles for the direwolf to smell, eyes steady and unworried. Ghost sniffed, bumped her wrist with his nose, and accepted her as one accepts snow on a winter morning, without comment. "I like him," she declared, and squinted up at John. "You look like your father. You know him?" John was surprised. Maya shrugged, which was like a mountain shrugging. "All the Vale knows of Lord Stark. Half the High Lords were boys under Lord Arryn with him, and he fought to put the king where he sits. Your father's a high song here. Peter used to make jokes about it." "He makes jokes about everything." "Does he?" John watched Peter across the yard. Smiling at a guardsman's jest, he had almost certainly planted himself. "Yes," Maya said, her tone making it not quite a complaint. "He also gives good silver. That matters more." Runestone proved to be a great, wind-bitten pile of ancient stone crouched on cliffs that frowned into the sea. Bronze-Yon Royce received John in a hall whose rafters smelled of smoke, salt, and old gods. Runes chased each other across the edges of bronze shields hung along the walls. "Eddard Stark's blood and boy," Yon said when John knelt. "You'll have bread and salt and a place beside my son's fire. I will see what steel is in you, and whether it will take a good temper or warp at the quench." The Royce sons gave John their hands. Andar had shoulders as square as stones and a laugh that made dishes tremble. Rabar, whose beard was barely a thought, had eyes that had already decided which songs they liked. Waymar was young and beautiful in a way that would have unsettled a kinder boy. His hair fell like a raven's wing to his collar, and he wore his disdain like another kind of jewelry. "Snow," Waymar said, rolling the word like a lantry peach and finding it insufficiently sweet. "If you do not freeze, you may yet learn to be a man." John looked at him and found in himself a small, sharp pleasure. "My uncle says men grow better in winter," he said. "Perhaps I will yet be better than you." Andar roared, and Rabar grinned, and even Bronze-Yon's mouth moved in what might have been an approving twitch before he told them all to stop sounding like a kettle. The days at Runestone taught John the Vale's grammar. The wind spoke first and most often. In the yard he learned the weight of Royce bronze, heavier than the mail and leather he knew from Winterfell, cunningly made so that it turned aside blades the way a stubborn truth turned aside lies. He learned to hawk with falcons that looked at him with an intelligence he had never felt from a hawk before, their eyes like coins that could buy something only the sky sold. He learned that the sea here did not make friends with the land but argued with it endlessly, and that the cliffs were the argument made stone. Here, more than anywhere, he learned how men bent to the weather without breaking. Bronze-Yon did not speak much, but he made himself understood. "Cut that again," he told John, when John brought a log to the splitting block and sent the axe too far in. "Leave no work for the man who comes after you, save the clean work, and hold your shield lower. It protects nothing when it protects your pride." In the evenings John sat at the reverse of that pride, his own, and listened to the men talk. Waymar did not listen, because his ears were full of himself. He rode in the yard as if the world watched, and for the world that was enough. Some nights he would draw John aside and speak softly of things more south than sea, of Gulltown's dances and the looks girls gave him as if he were made of something more than milk and flesh. John did not much speak of girls. The only girl who lived in his ribcage was a small, fierce wolf child with needles and elbows, and she did not belong in any boy's songs. Letters came from the south as winter roughened. Peter sent them, and they tasted of claret and coin. In them, King's Landing became a place of counting and courtesies. Peter wrote of this man's want and that woman's widowhood with the same delicate delight. "Men are accounts," he wrote once. "Women are books that men have not learned to read. Learn both and you will never be poor." John did not answer often. He wrote to his father and to Robb. To Sansa he wrote little. She sent one letter full of careful prettiness. and Arya sent one half-torn where she had tried to draw a dire wolf and had made a dog that looked too happy. Jon kept that one. News came and laid itself out like an iron page. Jon Arryn had died for love of the realm and been buried under cold stone. The king rode north to set Lord Stark at his right hand. Then another letter, like a shadow across a yard already in shade. Bran had fallen. Alive, Ned wrote. Alive. Jon took that to the small gods' wood at Runestone, where the weirwood gnarled itself like a fist, and knelt. Ghost sat beside him with eyes that watched things men could not see. When the boar gored the king, winter exhaled and the room at Runestone grew smaller. Bronze Yohn called his sons in and his men and told them things Jon had not thought a lord needed to say aloud. That the Vale would watch and wait. That the falcon did not stoop for every sparrow. That knowledge was an arrow one ought not waste on a rock. Jon sat with his hands on his knees and thought of his father in a city of heat. He dreamt one night of a throne made of swords and a man walking up steps to it that grew longer as he walked, so that he never reached. Ghost woke him with a muzzle pressed under his arm. Peter Baelish returned to the Vale when the leaves had long since fallen and the bare bones of trees sketched writing against a white sky. He came not to Runestone but to the gates of the moon, and the news he brought traveled faster than he did. The Hand had been accused of treason. He would not, Jon said, as if saying it made the lie that had been laid on Ned untrue. Bronze Yohn's face did not change. Men of the first men learned long ago to hold their expressions in their bones, not their skin. You are young, Yohn said, but you have a good nose. A man who would betray a thing must first know the value of what he is selling. Eddard Stark is not so learned. Jon went to the yard and swung a sword until his shoulders burned and the breath in his chest was hot and salt. Ghost paced him, his mouth open in a grin that was not a human grin, tongue lolling, eyes alive with the joy of doing. Somewhere in the doing, Maribald the master of bows came to stand with Yohn at the edge of the yard. They watched Jon the way men watch whether to know if it will ruin a harvest. The letter that made the yard fall silent was the length of a man's hand. It bore no seal. The words were plain enough for a child to read. Lord Eddard Stark beheaded on the steps of Baelor September, under the king's order. Jon did not weep. He did not change expression. He put his sword carefully in the rack and walked out with Ghost behind him and did not feel the cold. The cliffs were iron. The sea did not care. He found himself at the weirwood again, at the god's wood that was smaller than Winterfell's and so somehow greater, as if a thing shrunk grows more intense. He put his forehead to the rough bark until it marked his skin and stayed that way until the light went. When he returned, Bronze Yohn offered him a cup. Jon took it and did not drink. He said, I will go south and kill a king. You will do no such thing, Yohn said, in a voice that could have been carved. You will do as your father taught you and measure your steps. The Vale is closed. Lady Arryn keeps her knights home. I do not agree with her, but I keep my oath. I will send men to guard the high road and carve the clans out of their rocks. Men who ride to King's Landing will do so in their coffins. Jon stared at him. Then I will go north, to Robb. You will not go anywhere, Yohn said. You are not a lord. You are my ward. You will sit a horse until it understands your legs. You will cut until your hands bleed. You will put your rage into things that do not bleed when struck. Jon's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Waymar, who was watching him from the shadows with eyes that looked, for the first time Jon had ever seen, almost kind. My father, Jon said, and had to stop because his voice wanted to break and he would not give it leave. My father died a crow's death. Your father died as he lived, Yohn answered, honest to the last injury. And now you will live as he taught you, or I will set you on a mule and send you up to the Eyrie and let Lady Arryn teach you how to sing to her boy. He leaned down. Do not waste yourself, Jon Snow. I do not have sons enough to waste another one. That winter went down into Jon like iron into water. He rose before light and ran the cliff path until salt burned his lungs, and put himself to sword and spear and bow. He learned to ride the little, hard Vale horses that could find their feet where goats hesitated. He learned the rope ladders to snow and sky with Maya's laughter floating below him like a net. He learned to be still while the wind spoke, and to make his hands do what the wind would not. He learned to be a man that winter. When Peter Baelish came to Runestone at last, he came with a softer tread, as if he knew the ground too well. He wore a finer cloak and the same smile. Bronze Yon received him with the courtesy that one gives to a hand one would rather not shake. John watched the two men talk and felt as if he were watching a hawk and a weasel decide who was a better thief. "Your father was a good man," Peter told John later, when the three of them had done speaking and John had been left with the Lord of Coins in the yard. "Good men are treasures. Sadly, men are poorer now." John looked at him. "You sent me letters that called treachery another man's coin counting." "I send many letters," Peter said agreeably. "Their virtue is not in the truth they contain but the truth they leave out. I grieve for Lord Eddard. My grief is not an empty purse. I have brought news that matters. Your brother has been named king in the north. The river lords bow to him, and the north is his." A heat that had nothing to do with anger ran through John. "Rob, a boy winning men," Peter said, not unkindly. "Oh, do not look so hard at me. I was once a boy who thought men would follow me because I wished it. It is a beautiful, brief madness." He leaned closer. "I can help you. The Vale will not ride for your brother while Lisa Aaron holds the keys to its stables. But keys can be stolen or made to fit. There are lords here who would follow Bronze Yon if he snapped his fingers. Yon does not snap. He is the kind of man who thinks doors will open if you put your shoulder to them long enough." "Will they?" John asked. "Sometimes," Peter said. "Sometimes they open on your foot." He spread his hands. "You are a Stark in a house that remembers Starks. The old blood likes to talk to itself. Be useful. Be honorable. Be seen. Leave the rest to men like me." John had no taste for it. He went to the yard and cut the air until it bled. He rode with Maya up to Skye when the ladders were mended and the wind clawed at him with 10,000 fingers. She laughed at it and yelled something the wind took away. At the top, where the world goes away into blue, she sat with her legs dangling over a drop like a god sitting on a cloud, ate an apple, and told John stories about men who had fallen because they looked down. "I will not fall," John said. "Everyone falls," Maya said. "The trick is to fall where you mean to." She tossed the core, and it flew and flew until it became part of the sky. He fell where he meant to, into work, into the winter, into being a man made of other men's teachings. The world fell elsewhere. It fell at the Twins, where bread and salt were made into knives. It fell in the Riverlands, where fires wrote the names of villages across the night. It fell in King's Landing, where boys put crowns on other boys and men counted the cost between them. John kept his feet on the cliff. It was nearly a year after Ned Stark's death when Peter came again, and this time he did not come to Runestone first. He went straight to the Eyrie with a small, swift company and a cloak white as a promise. Lisa Aaron married him in the High Hall within 3 days of his arrival. The Vale sings faster of weddings than of war. The song came down the ladders and along the high road in the mouths of mule drivers, and it spilled into the gates of the moon like wine from a knocked cup. Nestor Royce sent a messenger as spare and hard as a spear to Runestone. Bronze Yon read the little letter twice and did not swear aloud. "He is a man who climbs," he said softly, almost to himself. "He never stares long at the drop." John imagined Peter's smile as he lifted Lisa's hand to his lips and thought of doors and shoulders. He thought, too, of a girl he had not seen in almost 2 years, with hair like sunset and a stubborn chin that had learned to lift. He did not know why Peter's marriage should make him think of Sansa, but it did. A month later, when the leaves were barely begun to fatten again, Peter returned to Runestone with Lisa's letters in his sleeve and the smell of the High Hall on him. Bronze Yon received him in the courtyard where the sea could look him in the face. "Lady Aaron will have the Vale kept from war," Peter said in a voice that understood what it asked. "She holds her son like a lamp and will not let the wind near it. She holds him like a candle and burns her own hand," Yon said. Tell her she may keep her stables locked and her roads clean and her hands full of keys for as long as winter cares to watch. The Lord's declarant will speak. The Lord's declarant. Peter's smile was small. I have always loved the way men put titles on their impatience. Keeps their hands busy while their minds learn to lose. They will not lose, Yon said. They will wait. Peter's eyes slid to John. He took him aside afterward. You should come to the Eyrie, he told John in a voice that had little to do with the words. There is a need for men who are not loyal to their own reflections. There is a boy who does not know where his own feet end and the mountain begins. There is a girl who needs a brother. John went still. A girl. Peter's laugh was small and bright. The Vale is not made of stones alone. There are stories in it, too. Would you hear one? He did not wait for consent. A girl came from the south wearing another name and hair a shade that belonged in a different house. She is a good girl from a good house. She is learning new games. She misses home. Every thought John had split down the middle and ran two ways at once. They ran as boys run when a dog chases them, and as men run when a fire does. Sansa, he said, because saying a name can make a thing true and sometimes more dangerous. Peter's smile did not change. Lady Elaine Stone, he corrected gently. She does not need a brother who says her name too loudly. She needs a man who remembers his father. The Eyrie was the same mountain John had seen from below, but it was also a rule written in stone. To climb to it with Maya was to feel the world become whole and simple. 1 foot and then the other, the mule's breath, the wind, the sheer drop and the sheer will not to fill it. At Skye, the third way castle, Maya tied Ghost and the mule with knots John could not untie if she did not wish it. They fall if they are fools, she told the dire wolf, scratching his ear. Don't be a fool. Ghost licked her chin. The high hall of the Eyrie was a glass of cold light. The floor was so clean and white that it seemed a shame to put men's feet on it. The throne was a carved, icy marvel beneath a great falcon. Lisa sat there with her son in front of her on a low stool, her hand in the boy's hair as if she thought that if she let go he would fall through the floor. She greeted Bronze Yon with a thin courtesy, Nestor with none, and Peter with honey. Yon's face did not change as she explained what the Vale would not do and why the knot was righteousness itself. She spoke as if the mountains listened to her more than they did to the wind. John stood behind the Royce men and watched Robert Arryn cough as if his chest needed to be reminded that air existed. He felt a pity so sudden and so deep it surprised him. Elaine Stone stood near the pillar where light fell on marble and made it glow. She wore a gown as plain as milk. Her hair, dyed a brown that wanted to be soft, had been set in a simple fall. She looked at the floor with care, as if it might take offense if she stepped on it wrong. When her eyes lifted, they found John's. He had thought he would see Sansa there under whatever dyes, in whatever gown, no matter the name she wore. He had thought she would call to him as a river calls to a man who has known thirst. Instead, he saw a girl who had learned 1,000 tiny things that had nothing to do with wolves or words spoken under trees. She saw him and did not see him. Her face was a window that closed and then opened and then a shutter fell. A breath later, Peter had come to her side. He laid a father's hand on her shoulder that did not look like a father's hand. "Elaine," he said, "this is Jon Snow, Ward of Bronze Yon. He is of your stone, if not of your name." She curtsied as if her knees had always known how. "My lord," she said, as if he were. John bowed as he had been taught. "My lady." They did not use any other names. In the days that followed, the Eyrie became a room with many doors. Peter slipped through them. He spoke to Yon at dawn in a voice that knew how to count oaths. He spoke to Lisa with the gentleness of someone who has learned the easiest way to guide a wild thing is to make it think it guides itself. He spoke to John in the moments between, as if he were a stone a mason taps to hear if there is a flaw hidden in it. "You have a temper," he said once, when John's mouth had shut on words that would have been swords. "It will kill you if you let it walk before you. Let it walk behind. Let it bite when you ask, not when it asks. Be a man who can say no to his own blood." "My father's blood was honest," John said. "Honesty is the instrument," Peter murmured. Use it to play something that can be heard. It was near enough to summer that wind no longer tried to unmake men, but the high cold remained. John watched Robert cough and be fed sweets and be led about by soft hands. He watched Lisa's eyes and saw in them a fear so loud it drowned counsel. He watched Sansa move as Elaine, saying little, doing much. A smile here, a story there, a kindness that went unnoticed because kindness often does when the world thinks it has more interesting games. He watched Peter touch her elbow as one touches a door to see if it will open. And then he watched the open. It was a day of light so bright it made the sky enamel. Lisa took them all to the high hall to stand at the moon door. She wanted to show Peter the world, she said, her hands fluttering like birds who had lost their trees. She wanted to show him how high they were above men and their wars. The moon door was a half-circle cut through the floor, beyond which the world fell away cleanly. The wind sang different there, as if it were coming from inside the mountain. Lisa stood with Peter by the edge. Her boy, pale and sleepy-eyed, curled on a cushion. Elaine stood with her hands clasped, more still than statues. John stood with Bronze Yon and Nestor and 3 knights whose eyes were on everything. Ghost did not like the place and kept his paws away from the dark half-hole as if it were a fire. Lisa's words ran on, and the sense ran off and hid. She spoke of promises made years ago as if they were warm loaves just taken from the oven. She spoke of sisters and kisses and futures that had never been true. She began to speak of Elaine. The words sharpened. The wind sharpened with them. John did not hear the first cry so much as feel it. It pulled the hairs on his arm upright. Lisa had turned, had seized Elaine by the arm with fingers that were the color of skimmed milk and the strength of iron. She dragged the girl to the moon door with a grace born of madness. "She is a whore," Lisa said, and it was a prayer and an accusation and the end of a life. "She is a..." The words turned sideways in her mouth because Peter said her name. He said it in a voice John had not heard from him, a gentle pleading that most men would have believed was born of love. He stepped in, one ha. ND raised, palm empty, mouth a small, beautiful wound. "Lisa," she looked at him. For a moment John thought madness would blink and break, and this would be one more story they told at tables about the time Lady Arryn almost cast a girl from the sky. Then Peter moved. It was very little motion. A man might make it in his sleep while turning onto his other side. He put his hand to Lisa's waist, and then to her throat, and kissed her mouth against words and pushed her with the other hand as if setting a plate on a shelf. Lisa turned backward and down. Her eyes found nothing to hold. Her fingers clawed at light. She fell through the moon door into the breath of the mountain and was gone. No one moved. Robert made a sound and swallowed it up again into the place where the cough lived. The wind said something that might have been her name. Peter's face had gone utterly smooth, a countenance a sculptor might use to teach a boy about the lie of marble. He looked at the hole. Then he looked at Elaine. "It was her," he said softly, in a voice that had rehearsed the words for a decade. "She went to push you and slipped. Gods, it might have worked. It might have, if the room had been peopled only by those who wanted to believe him. It might have, if not for Ghost. The dire wolf whom even wind did not frighten had moved with no sound." He eased his muzzle past Elaine's hip and put himself between her and Peter Baelish, and lifted his lips back from his beautiful teeth with a slowness that was not a threat but a verdict. Men draw breath when they forget they are doing something difficult. The knights did. Bronze Yon did not. He took one step forward and put a hand on John's chest. "Boy," he murmured, "this is where we do not let blood lead." Peter's eyes flicked to John, and for the first time since John had met him, Peter's face showed something that did not belong to him. It was not fear. It was not surprise. It was a kind of contempt at being found out that a cat shows to a child who has opened a box and seen the mouse already dead. "Call the Lord's declarant," Bronze Yon said, in a voice that could have taught stone. Now, they came as if the mountains themselves had decided to wear men for a day. Anya Wainwood in steel and patience, Simon Templeton with a gaze like a taut bowstring, Horton Redfort whose hair had made its last argument and lost long ago, Gilwood hunter with a love of the high air. They gathered in the high hall where a madness had ended, and they listened. Peter spoke like rain. He did not weep because men like him only weep when they choose to, and tears are a coin they do not spend lightly. He told them of Lisa's grief, of her long loneliness, of her hunger for safety that had grown teeth. He told them that men sometimes fell where they meant to stand. Elaine stood and did not speak until Bronzione looked at her and said, "Child." Then she told them what Lisa had done, in a voice as plain as bread, and what Peter had done, in a voice that had borrowed a little of the wind's iron. "Who are you?" Anya Wainwood asked gently, as if coaxing a frightened colt. "Elaine Stone," she said at once. "No," Wainwood said, not unkindly. "Who are you?" Sansa Stark closed her eyes for a heartbeat. When she opened them, she found Jon. They did not move toward each other. There are distances one can cross with a step and others that need another kind of bridge. She said her name and the room changed shape. Peter's mouth made a beautiful line, and his eyes did their work. "This is a cruel trick," he said softly. "A child I took into my care is being used as a piece. How eagerly the Lord Declarant puts a wolf in a falcon's nest." "The wolf has been in this nest longer than you," Gilwood Hunter said dryly. Peter turned his face to Bronzione and then to Jon, and something like pity passed over it as the shadow of a cloud passes over a field. "Do not be a fool, boy," he said almost tenderly. "She has a marriage and 1,000 knives pointed at her. You do not save her with truth. You save her with lies no man can bear to pick apart." Jon heard his father's voice in that moment. Not the words Ned had said, but the ones he would have said if he had had one more afternoon in the Godswood. He stepped forward to stand beside Sansa. "I will save her," he said, "with men who do not cut their bread with lies." Lyn Corbray had been called from his hunt and came into the hall with snow in his hair, Lady Forlorn on his hip like truth itself. He looked at Peter with a complicated affection and at Sansa with something that might have wished to be faith if it had known how. "What do we do then?" he asked, with a yawn that did not quite hide his interest. "We do what lords are meant to do," Anya Wainwood said. "We keep a child safe. We keep our mountains unbloodied. We call this what it is." "What is it?" Simon Templeton asked. "Murder," Bronzione said. He looked at Peter and did not look away. "I will not stain stone by giving him a sky tomb. He does not belong to the old way. He belongs to an iron chain and a dark room." "No," Sansa said, sudden as a sparrow startling. "No," all turned to her. Her hands were white. "He will not live to spin this into something that hurts my sister in the west, or my brother in the north, or the men who held me here safe when no one else would." She swallowed. "My lord," she said to Bronzione, "let it be swift." There was a long silence in which the wind spoke for them all, and then Anya Wainwood said, "It will be swift." They took Peter Baelish down to the gates of the moon because the Eyrie is not a place for blood, and because men must die on ground that holds them honestly. He died without weeping and without begging, which was the last and smallest courtesy he gave himself. Before the end, he found Jon's eyes. "You will learn," he said, not unkindly. "You will learn what it is to choose a winter that never ends and a spring that lies." Then he put his neck on the block as if he had chosen it at a market stall, and Bronzione's sword made a sound that was only a sound. Afterward, the veil breathed. It breathed as a man does who has dragged a barrow uphill and found himself at last on level ground. The world beyond the mountains did not. It burned and broke and ate its young. Raven after raven came with ashes in their words. The twins, the red wedding, the crown on a boy in the west and a girl in the south, the ironborn swelling like a bruise along the coasts. Somewhere in that noise, the north sent a small, fierce cry, a letter fox-marked, from a man who wrote like a knife. Ramsay Bolton wrote the veil. "Bring your eagles," he wrote, "I will teach them to eat like wolves." Anya Wainwood wanted to bind the ladle hand to the sword hand at once. Bronzione wanted to count oats and hooves. Nestor wanted to let the winter speak and answer after listening. Sansa's face did not change as they argued. When the lords had made their calculations to the 8th mark, Jon stood and spoke. "Robb is dead," he said. "My father is dead. My mother is dead. But the North is not. I have learned much in the Vale. I have learned wind and stone and patience. I have learned that the old blood can wait a long time to do what is needful. Now I need the Vale, not to make a king, to make a home. The man in Winterfell is a sickness. We have the cure." He looked at Anya Waynwood, at Bronze Yohn, at the men whose hands were on the table of the Vale. "Let me take the knights down off your mountains. Let me knock on the North's door as the sun knocks. If the door opens, I will not go in. I will stand in the yard and hold it open and be the man at the gate." Anya Waynwood's mouth softened. "You speak like a lord." "I speak like a son," Jon said. Sansa did not speak until the others had said their piece. Then she stepped forward as Elaine Stone and removed that name as one removes a cloak. "I am Sansa Stark of Winterfell." The room stood. "My husband sits in the city that killed my father, and my heart sits nowhere because the chair that held it was broken at a wedding. I have no right to call men to my aid. I can only ask. I ask." Bronze Yohn nodded once, as if the movement had been written in stone when he was a boy and he had only now read it. "The Vale will ride," he said, "for the Stark girl, for the North that does not kneel to coils and coin, for the honor of the old way." They came down the high road like a winter that had found its legs. The knights of the Vale were iron in the sun, their lances blue and bright. Jon rode at the fore with Bronze Yohn and Anya Waynwood, Sansa behind beneath a plain hood that would not stay plain long. They moved through the bloody gate and into a world that had forgotten the way 1,000 hooves make the ground sing when the men above them know what they are. Ghost loped beside Jon's horse, not loving the mass of men but loving his man. Jon thought of his father and of rooms and roads. He thought of Peter Baelish's last words and tossed them down the well of his memory and heard them fall until even the echo died. They found the North as a man finds a hearth that has been used to burn a sickness from a house. Smoke, ash, a bitter smell. They found small folk who pressed hands together when the Vale passed and sent prayers hurrying after them like children who are not old enough to be quiet. They found men in flayedman livery who had forgotten that fear is not the only tool men have. The Vale taught them quickly. Jon sent ravens to the mountain clans, the Umbers, the Mormonts, the flinty men who had once looked him over and seen a boy who did not belong. He did not call himself Lord. He did not call for oaths. He called for men to come and look each other in the face. They came. The clans came down from the hills with teeth like knives and eyes like flint. The Umbers came with laughter like thunder. The Mormont women came with spears in their strong hands and a little girl whose stare would have shamed a king. They came because Sansa Stark stood in front of them and did not ask them to bow. She asked them to remember. In the end, they put their pieces in order on a map that had been used and washed and used again until the rivers were suggestions. Winterfell, the Boltons, the Freys, the snows that men cursed because they impeded and blessed because they covered tracks. The Vale Knights who could move as a river does when it is angry. The men of the North who knew where a river does not move at all. The battle came as all battles do. One moment a plan, the next a mess, and then something else entirely. Jon rode with Bronze Yohn on his left and Anya Waynwood on his right. He had no long claw. He had a plain, honest blade that had learned his hand as he had learned it. Ghost vanished and reappeared like guilt in a coward's sleep. Sansa did not ride into battle, but she stood on a rise with women who had stones in their pockets and eyes that had no stones at all. Her hood fell back. Her hair was like a banner. Ramsay Bolton stood on Winterfell's wall and smiled as if men were a joke only he understood. He sent arrows and lies down on them. Jon waited until the North had taken what it must and given what it must not. He listened to the wind. He remembered Maya, telling him where to fall. He told the Vale to fall and where. They fell like snow. They fell where the Boltons did not expect to be buried. Bronze Yohn cut a path like a plow through men who had thought they were not fields. Anya Waynwood set her teeth and became something the stories had not thought to put a gown on. Jon found himself in front of a man whose face he had sometimes seen when he closed his eyes and hoped to sleep. He did not speak to Ramsay. He did not say the clever thing. He swung. Ramsay parried once and was good. Jon was better. He broke the other man down into blood and noise and then into silence. Afterward, Winterfell stood. It stood as a man stands after he has been on his knees for too long, with blood in his face and iron in his legs. Jon stood in its yard and looked up at its towers and saw a house that had been his only in the ache of his ribs and the back of his throat. He did not step toward the great hall. He stood and felt the cold go all the way through him and out the other side, as if he were finally hollowed to the shape he had been meant to fill. Sansa came to him there, with the snow lifting like birds around her. Her face was not a girl's face and not yet a woman's. He saw their father in her mouth and their mother in her eyes and herself in both. Neither of them spoke first because there are some silences that must be shared before anything worth saying can be said. She moved then and put her arms around him, and Jon discovered that a man can be held by a girl and not be made smaller. He put his chin on her hair and closed his eyes and believed, just for a moment, that Winter had an answer to a question that had been being asked since the first wolf looked at the first fire. When they broke, she wiped her cheek with the back of her glove. "You are not Lord," she said, not a question. "No," Jon said. "Good," she said softly. "Then you can help me hold it." He nodded. "I can be the man at the gate." "You are good at gates," she said. Something like a laugh went through her and left warmth behind. "You always stood in doorways when you were small, as if you could keep the whole world out with your shoulders." "Sometimes I kept Arya out," he said. "No one keeps Arya out," Sansa said. Her mouth trembled and steadied. "No one kept the world out, but you kept enough." They made a hall not of banners and not of horns but of faces. The north stood in it, and the Vale stood as well, and for the first time Jon felt the shape of something that could be called a home without it snagging in him. Bronze Yohn did not smile in any man's way, but his eyes gave Jon a look he had not often had. The look a man gives another man when he thinks, "I would follow him into a bad place and not close my eyes." Later, when the fires had been made honest and the dead made quieter than they had been in life, Jon went out into the godswood of Winterfell. The weirwood there was the tree of his childhood, its face cut and bleeding red tears, its roots pushing up at the world like questions. He put his palm to the wood and felt the cold go into him the way a truth does when it is finally acknowledged aloud. Ghost came and leaned his great head against Jon's thigh. "You took me to the mountain," Jon told the tree as if telling his father. "You sent men with me that would not lie to me. You made me learn rooms when I wanted roads. You made me a man among men who did not want to see me. You made me a brother to a sister who had to be brave while men called her someone else." He breathed. "I will not fail them. I will not fail you." The leaves moved though no wind came. The months that followed were work, not songs. The snow did not care for songs. It only cared where men put foot to ground and how often they looked up to the sky to see what it would do next. Jon became what he had promised. A gate. He stood at the place where the north let men in and kept others out, and he learned that mercy and strength are two sides of the same door. Sansa sat in the high seat and learned when to listen and when to speak, and all the while she learned new ways to keep fear from buying a room in her ribcage. The Vale Knights went home by roads kept by men who had learned what it meant to ride beside a boy who was not their lord and still was. Waymar Royce did not die in the snow beyond the wall that winter, as he had in one of the lives Jon had not lived. He died 13 years later on the step of a keep in the Vale, with 2 children and a wife who loved him, and Bronze Yohn wept for him in a room no one saw, and his weeping did not shame him. Maya Stone married a hard, good man who made her laugh when ladders broke. She never cut her hair again. Nestor Royce kept his ledgers and died with his thumb smudged with ink. His face turned toward the east as if he expected dawn to owe him money. Peter Baelish was a song bards learned to sing with care, because men listened for the lies inside it and then looked away from the lies inside themselves. Lisa Arryn became a story that the mountain told when the wind was mischievous. And sometimes, when boys leaned too far over ledges, a mother would grab them by the collar and say, "Does the wind love you more than I do?" The north held. It would have to hold again. Seasons are like enemies in that way. They always give you another chance to know them wrong. The wall remained, and the cold beyond it did not forget men. John rode up to it when he could, rode along its length, looked out. He sent food and men and letters to the men in black with hands that had learned to count without Peter's voice saying numbers in his head. He did not take the black. He did not need to. He understood now that vows come in as many shapes as winter does. Sometimes he and Sansa walked the walls at dusk when the snow made the world quiet. They did not speak much. They did not need to. They had learned a new language on different mountains, and now they spoke it with their hands, with the shape of what they did, not what they said. On such an evening, with the sky the color of a Northman's eye, Sansa said, "Will we be all right?" John looked at the world. He saw the high road like a scar. He saw cliffs in his memory. He saw a boy in a God's wood being told to do more than try. He put his hand on the cold stone and found in it a warmth that came from himself. "Yes," he said. "If we fall, we will fall where we mean to." The wind answered as if in agreement. Ghost's ears pricked. In the Godswood, the weirwood's red leaves stirred as if a man had just walked past them without a sound. And in that moment John felt, more than thought, that men do not always choose their roads, but they choose how to walk them. That, in the end, was what the veil had given him. The mountain had taught him how not to look down. He thought then of his father's hand on his shoulder in a winter grove a lifetime ago. He thought of Peter Baelish's eyes and the thin, rich smile that had thought the world a ledger and men items in it to be moved and added and erased. He thought of Bronze Yon's quiet. He thought of Maya's laugh. He thought of Sansa's name spoken without fear. And then he stopped thinking and simply stood, and winter stood with him, and the world turned slowly beneath their boots.